Alrighty, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And my name is Romana, by the way. I'm one of the dietitians here at PPMA. Really excited to be joining y'all for this workshop this evening. Um, Looks like you can see my screen all right. Okay, and you can see I also have this other video on here too. So I'm joining you from the kitchen and we are going to do a little bit of a workshop today. So I'll be kind of back and forth with screens. Um, but just making sure, I think we're all recorded and ready to go. So as I mentioned, my name is Romana. I'm one of the dietitians at PPMA, and I'm the one who does a lot of the one-on-ones. I'm going to be doing some more of these group sessions these next couple of months, but you're probably used to seeing Lauren here on these monthly meetups, but I'm very excited to be joining you all. If you do listen to the Nourish MD podcast, you will have heard my voice before alongside Lauren. And today, with our discussion on navigating holiday eating and moods, we're really going to be zeroing in on metabolism and then also toward the end, navigating alcohol during the holidays, whether you decide to consume alcohol or not. That's a totally personal choice, but we're just going to be chatting on that a little bit more. So last week, if you haven't had the chance to catch our Nourish MD podcast episode, Lauren and I talked through some tips for navigating holiday eating. And then next week, little spoiler, we're going to actually be chatting through some different fasting practices that can be utilized throughout the holiday season. So two really good episodes if you haven't listened to them already. But today, what we're really focusing on is learning practices to support your metabolism during the holidays from the perspective primarily of the gut microbiome as well as blood sugar balance. So we're really going to hone in on these two different areas and explore how those are key for your metabolism. And then we're also, of course, going to strategize some ways to just navigate food and alcohol consumption. Because this is a workshop, again, I'll be sharing some things with you from a little cutting board. We will have some time at the end for Q&A, so any questions, please feel free to either type them in the chat and we'll review them at the end, or you can just save them and unmute yourselves later. Alrighty, so let's first start off with discussing how to support your microbiome as a way to support your metabolism as well as your mood. These are both very interconnected pieces of the puzzle. But first and foremost, what is the gut microbiome? We've maybe heard this before, but it is the complex ecosystem of microbes that lives within your intestines, mostly within your large intestine as well as your colon. But we are going to have some of these microbes throughout our entire digestive tract, really starting from your mouth. There are trillions of microorganisms. These include different bacteria, fungi, viruses. There are actually 40 trillion and 40 trillion bacterial cells specifically, and we have 30 trillion human cells. So that's where the phrase comes that we are more bacteria than human cells, which is always fun. And it's estimated that there are upwards of over 1,000 different species of organisms that are housed within your body, which is quite wild. So it's a very complex ecosystem that we're dealing with here. But the gut microbiome essentially acts as another organ in the body in terms of how it influences a wide variety of body systems and our overall health. So when we discuss the role of the microbiome and look into how it really impacts our overall health beyond digestion, it's key for digesting our food, for breaking down those foods, those different nutrients into micronutrients, or those macronutrients as well as micronutrients, and then also influences how we actually absorb those nutrients. So what are we actually getting out of the food that we're eating? The microbes in our gut also allow us to actually break down fiber. So fiber is a type of carbohydrate that technically we don't digest. Our microbes do. So our digestive system itself doesn't actually break down those fibers. That is the role of those gut microbes. And fiber is really important. If you've had a chat with me before about cholesterol elimination, we know just how important fiber is. If you see that box of oatmeal, it says it's heart healthy, right? Why is that? It's because of the fiber. And oatmeal is a good fiber source amongst many other fiber sources that we're going to be chatting through today. But fiber is really important to support cholesterol elimination, of course, impacting cardiovascular health, heart health. And then these microbes, as they digest these different fibers, fiber is not just one thing, but they produce beneficial compounds, essentially like their own waste products, are actually very beneficial for us. A lot of those waste products are what we call short chain fatty acids. And short chain fatty acids, as molecules, they actually help reduce the risk of inflammatory diseases, including type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart disease, other conditions. They're also involved in metabolism. So metabolism is the breakdown. Whenever we think about that word, I just want you to think of breakdown. What are we breaking down? In this case, breaking down things like carbohydrates and fats, making us better able to utilize those nutrients and better able to absorb the nutrients from the foods that we are eating because we're more effectively breaking them down. So short chain fatty acids, about 95% of the short chain fatty acids in our body are either something called acetate, propionate, or butyrate. Butyrate is probably among the more commonly referenced short chain fatty acids, but acetate is very important for energy production as well as the building up of lipids within our body. So lipids are also called fats. We need our body to have this ability to produce fats because fats are very important for each of our cells. The walls of our cells are made from fats. So we need acetate in order for that to happen effectively. The second one, propionate, is mainly involved in producing glucose in the liver and the small intestine, which is very important for our energy levels. Glucose is the first form of energy that our body is going to go to, as opposed to fat or protein, for example. And then butyrate truly is the preferred energy source for the cells that line the colon. So when we talk about our gut lining or intestinal permeability being like holes in the gut lining, those cells that make up the gut lining require butyrate in order to function, to live, to sustain this gut lining of ours. So butyrate is very, very important. And there's research that actually does show that there appears to be an imbalance in gut microorganisms in individuals with type 2 diabetes. And we can turn the finger back to butyrate specifically, but these short chain fatty acids as a whole. Butyrate is really helpful in controlling blood sugar levels, improving insulin resistance. We'll talk more about what insulin resistance means. Specifically in individuals with type 2 diabetes, there's been some really good research on that. And even individuals without type 2 diabetes, short chain fatty acids are really important for supporting metabolism. And one way specifically is by increasing our body's production of glucagon-like peptide 1. We might know this more affectionately as GLP-1, which is what is being targeted. It's an enzyme. It's a protein that is being targeted with a lot of these newer weight loss medications, such as Ozempic, Mounjaro, et cetera. So backtracking, those short chain fatty acids increase that production. So it's essentially what those medications are doing. This butyrate also increases enzyme activity in our liver as well as in our muscle tissue. Both are two really important organs for insulin sensitivity, for blood sugar balance, and blood sugar regulation. So as you can see, the makeup of our gut microbiome, its ability to produce short chain fatty acids, has a really big impact on our metabolism as a whole and our nutrient breakdown, how effectively, how efficiently we are able to convert the food that we eat into chemical energy for our body to then use. And metabolism, as we've already alluded to, really deeply involves blood sugar balance, because blood sugar balance, glucose levels are directly related to how our body breaks down carbohydrates, which are definitely more prevalent this holiday season. And it's also important for how our body transports or uses carbohydrate building blocks once we've broken down those carbohydrates, more often than not, they're being broken down into glucose, which are that main carbohydrate building block. So it's kind of how we tie all this together. So when it comes to metabolism and mood, it's a bit of kind of a chicken or the egg situation. Within the research, we've seen not only do individuals with diabetes have a higher prevalence of microbial imbalance within the gut, but they also have double the risk of developing depression, which is a pretty alarming statistic. And then on the flip side, those with depression, whether clinical depression or major depressive disorder, one study found have 60% higher rate of developing diabetes versus those with no depression. So both of those situations, both of those conditions can lead to the other. Now, what is one common factor in both of those conditions? Inflammation. Also elevated cortisol, which is our body's main stress hormone. Cortisol, of course, at play in depression, that can drive insulin resistance, which can lead to type 2 diabetes. Leveraging strategies like the ketogenic diet, for example, which is something that we discuss in the podcast, to help support blood sugar balance, can also support brain health. That's actually one of the ways that the ketogenic diet, or that's the primary reason why it was initially developed, was actually for assisting in some of these brain conditions. But again, these are all topics that Lauren and I discuss that we discuss in the Nourish MD podcast. So if you haven't listened to that, we have a lot of episodes that explore this conversation within the context of different conditions. So why don't we explore further the connection between our gut and our mood, specifically through the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is referred to as the gut-brain superhighway. There are actually more signals that are sent from your gut to your brain than from your brain down to your gut. And this is the most direct physical connection between your gut and your brain and your nervous system, two systems that we often don't think about talking or communicating with one another. But it really is through your nervous system, because your vagus nerve is what innervates all of these muscles that make up your digestive system. So think about if you've ever gotten an upset stomach when you were nervous, or any other GI troubles when you were anxious or anticipating something, or even when you were really excited. It doesn't just have to be negative, but this is all thanks to the vagus nerve, how our brain can affect what we notice a little bit more downstream. The vagus nerve also helps regulate the speed of something called peristalsis, which is essentially gut movement, the movement of your muscles that make up your digestive system. And the microbes in our gut produce a variety of different compounds that help communicate and interact with our nervous system. So it's very much an electrical communication just as much as it is a chemical communication. So the makeup of our gut microbiome impacts those signals that are sent from our gut to our brain. And it's really important to determine what those signals are saying. So are they positive signals? Are they fear signals? Are they happy signals? So serotonin, for example, is a neurotransmitter that helps regulate both our sleep and our appetite. Also helps mediate our mood, inhibit pain, and about 95% of serotonin is actually produced in the gastrointestinal and GI tract. And your GI tract is then aligned with hundreds of millions of nerve cells or neurons, what we usually think of are in the brain, but are very present in our gut. So it makes sense that the inner workings of our digestive system don't just help you digest food, but they also can help guide your emotions. So that's how we're approaching this conversation of mood, first and foremost, through the digestive tract. The function of these neurons as well, and the production of neurotransmitters like serotonin, is very highly influenced by those good bacteria, those probiotics that make up your intestinal microbiome. So there's a lot of science that goes behind this, and there's a lot more that we understand about the vagus nerve, the gut-brain connection, and just the gut microbiome. There's still a lot of research that that is being developed, I suppose. But two of my favorite ways, and two really important ways to help nourish the gut microbiome, first and foremost, is consuming enough probiotic-rich foods. We can do this with a slight holiday spin. But probiotics, as I mentioned, those are those microbes. What do probiotics eat? prebiotic fiber. So we really want to emphasize both of these things, right? The end product, if you will, those probiotics. And we can incorporate a variety of different probiotic rich foods: sauerkraut, kimchi, yogurt, kefir, apple cider vinegar is even a probiotic rich food, tempeh, miso. I know people are probably going to ask about sourdough bread. So sourdough is still a potentially better choice in terms of probiotics compared to a less fermented, buttery dinner roll. However, once those probiotics hit that temperature of 150 degrees Fahrenheit, those exact probiotic benefits essentially, they don't all go away. They still have some of those end products, potentially those short chain fatty acids, for example. So we're thinking of the benefit in that case once these probiotics are cooked, more so as we still have those end products, but we no longer have those live probiotics, those live microbes. Still some benefits, still some prebiotic fibers potentially from those foods, but different ways that we can incorporate some of these foods with the holiday spin. Yogurt, if we're going to make, let's just say, a roasted potato or a roasted starch, having a little yogurt sauce on the side to just either dollop onto some of those dishes is a great option. Maybe you make a sauce, something that you can kind of drizzle onto your roasted vegetables. Sauerkraut is a great substitution for anything that just requires a little bite. So, for example, you can even chop it up and put it in a salad dressing. I've seen recipes for stuffing that incorporates sauerkraut into there too, and you might not even notice it. Again, if you're cooking it, you're not going to get those same benefits, but you're going to get some of those prebiotic fibers. We're going to highlight some recipes with apple cider vinegar today, and then maybe you're doing a vegetarian vegan Thanksgiving, and you want to use something like tempeh, or tempeh being a fermented soy product. Maybe you have a little Asian flair and you're incorporating miso into your cooking. That's another great way to get probiotics, or at least those end products of the probiotics. When it comes to fiber sources, we really want to emphasize fiber diversity. The more variety in these fiber sources, the more variety of probiotics or microbes that we can feed using these foods. So I've listed here a handful of different prebiotic fiber sources. For example, a lot of these are pretty great to incorporate in a Thanksgiving meal. For example, garlic, one of my personal favorites. But think about too, and one of the things that we'll be walking through today is making a seasonal salad and how many different fiber sources you can incorporate. So I'm going to switch over. My face here will disappear, but I'll just be on this other camera over here. We're going to make a little seasonal salad. So I'm going to start off with just some kale here. I think I'm a little tilted sideways. I don't know if that'll work with my view. We're just gonna make this work here. So this is some kale that I have. You can see I already massaged it, so it's a little bit more tender. You'll definitely want to massage it if you're only doing kale. You can do any other leafy greens as well. Leafy greens are a great source of prebiotic fibers, but we've got some kale here. One thing that I love utilizing is either a squash, or this is just some roasted sweet potato. And since I'm only making this salad for 1 to 2 people today, I'm just using 1/4 cup of this roasted sweet potato. And that kind of gives a little, I roasted it pretty nicely, so it can give it a little crunch that can kind of be like your starchy crouton alternative, for example. Still is important for us to balance out a salad by incorporating a starch. The other thing that I'm going to include to make this a little more fall are some pomegranates. So pomegranate seeds, pomegranate arils, whatever we want to call it. But I'm just going to do about a tablespoon in this one serving. And then my other favorite fall ingredient that you can see is also on our list here are pumpkin seeds. Pumpkin seeds are a really good source of zinc, potassium, really great mineral source. So these can be used in baking, on salads, even incorporated into a stuffing or a roasted vegetable, something along those lines. But these are really great to incorporate into a salad for a little bit of an extra fat source. Now, with our salads, we don't always need an extra fat source depending on the type of dressing that we're using. So, the dressing that I've prepared today incorporates, we've got some extra virgin olive oil. It might be a little bit difficult to see. A little bit of extra virgin olive oil. I didn't follow a recipe, but I just did a 1-to-1 between the olive oil and the apple cider vinegar. Red wine vinegar also works really well, just kind of benign, gives it a little bit of a zing though, but nothing too aggressive. You're not going to spike your blood sugar. These two, between red wine vinegar and apple cider vinegar, are definitely going to have the least amount of sugar content. And then in my dressing as well, which this is just my dressing here, you can see the consistency. I added some freshly chopped garlic in here too, with my oil and vinegar, and then a little bit of Italian seasoning, a little bit of Dijon mustard, which is going to give you, see how this is a bit emulsified? Otherwise, your oil and vinegar is going to separate. So Dijon mustard is really great for helping emulsify a dressing, kind of combining that oil and water, or that oil and vinegar rather. And then this is my favorite secret ingredient for any salad dressing. It is anchovy paste. Sounds crazy, but it gives it a really nice savory umami flavor, a little bit of additional saltiness. So that's pretty simple, but that's our little fall salad. And imagine having this in a larger little container or a beautiful bowl. You get a open this. Now you have a lovely little, we're going to call it a harvest salad. Alternatively, so I added sweet potato and pomegranate seeds. You could add something like apples, pears, any of these fiber sources, but you don't necessarily want to carbo load your salad, right? We can stick to, let's just say, 2 of these different carbohydrate sources, maybe a fruit and an additional starch source. Maybe you swap the sweet potato for quinoa. Maybe you swap the pomegranate seeds for apples or pears, like I had just mentioned. So there are so many different ways that we can create a salad like that using simple ingredients and make it somewhat festive. And again, we're going to get some additional gut support from the apple cider vinegar, and we're going to get some great fiber from the kale, from the sweet potato. The pomegranate seeds are going to have a great source of fiber as well. That garlic, great prebiotic source too. So that's our little harvest salad. We'll revisit that in just a minute. But let's move into part 2, discussing balancing blood sugar during the holidays to support healthy metabolism. This is something that Lauren and I talk about a lot. We kind of circle it into a whole variety of our podcast episodes because it is so relevant for a wide variety of different health conditions. But if you'd like to learn more about metabolism within the context of different health conditions, definitely be sure to check out the NourishMD podcast. And why is this so important? The importance of blood sugar balance and metabolism for mood can seem like not totally related in certain contexts, but especially during this time of year, there are more treats, inevitably. There are holiday parties and celebrations. We are busier and probably exercising less, just as a general trend. In general, I feel like this also is probably, for most people, can identify that this might be a higher stress time. We have altered routines in general. More time with family can be just as joyful as it also can be stressful. So there's just a lot of different dynamics during this time. With more happening, nutrition likely is not going to be the top priority. But if we can stick to some of these basic strategies, that's really going to help support your metabolism and your gut health, because, as we discussed, this impacts our overall health as well as our mood. So what is the situation with insulin and glucose? We often talk about insulin resistance versus insulin sensitivity. What are we really referring to when we talk about blood sugar balance? Because it's a big buzzword right now. But when we talk about blood sugar balance, what we're referring to is the ability for your pancreas, which is producing insulin, to effectively produce insulin, to transport glucose out of our bloodstream and into our cells. That's essentially what we're talking about when we're discussing blood sugar balance and the blood sugar dysregulation is when that process isn't happening effectively, right? So when we consume most carbohydrates, that gets broken down into glucose and or sugar. That stimulates insulin to be produced. And I say most because there are other types of carbohydrates, other types of sugars like fructose, for example, which comes from fruit. But we're really focusing on glucose specifically within this conversation because it's more widespread and it's more so what is affecting this blood sugar balance. So glucose, again, vast majority of these simple sugars that we encounter. So if we imagine insulin being like a car, glucose being the people, the bloodstream is the freeway. We need the people to go along the freeway to their homes, the homes being the cells. So if everything's working efficiently, ideally we have just enough cars, insulin, on the road within our bloodstream to get all of the people back home. So again, the home is our cells, those cells being primarily in the liver as well as in the muscle tissues. If we consume a large amount of carbohydrates, we're adding more people to the mix. There's more people on the road, right? We need more cars then. So there's more work on the pancreas to produce more insulin. Insulin being those cars to transport more of those people. And our cells and our tissues, kind of on this end stream, they need to be open and receptive to bringing more glucose in. So you can see here in this little diagram, this is hypothetically what it looks like for a glucose channel to be closed. This is what it looks like for the glucose channel to be open. I want you to imagine this being a garage door. This is our home, right? The glucose, the people, they need to be able to go home, open the garage door in order to enter the cells. Well, there's a variety of different areas where these issues can occur. So first of all, if the pancreas can't keep up with insulin production to handle the amount of glucose coming in, that's kind of before this visual, right? That just means that we don't have enough cars on the road to get people back to their homes. On the flip side, another issue that can arise is if the cells aren't receptive, even if we have enough insulin, people aren't actually getting their house keys. So like they're still not getting inside. We still have more people hypothetically on the road, right? So that's kind of my analogy in terms of what insulin resistance looks like. And that is the result of these issues, right? Insulin resistance compared to insulin sensitivity is when those issues are arising, that process isn't happening effectively. So insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity are the opposite. We want to improve insulin sensitivity. We want to decrease insulin resistance. And from a blood lab standpoint, if you're getting your blood drawn and you're looking at your hemoglobin A1C or your fasting insulin or your fasting glucose, this is where we see elevated insulin, elevated A1C beyond 5.5, 5.6, going into more of what we consider that pre-diabetic range, and as well as elevated glucose in the blood. And fasting insulin can really give us the earliest sign of this dysfunction because we get a better sense of if our insulin is having to work harder to put more cars on the road, essentially. So this conversation especially relates to when we are eating, but what about when we're not eating? So going too long between meals can also cause some blood sugar dysregulation, causing low blood sugar or hypoglycemia, which is characterized by more of these lower dips compared to these higher peaks. This can be especially exacerbated if we are spiking high after meals. So this is a process called reactive hypoglycemia, where we're going super high and then we're crashing really hard. This usually happens a couple of hours after a meal. Alternatively, this is a little bit different than reactive hyperglycemia, which often happens overnight, where that results from an increase in blood sugar levels after blood sugar has dropped too low overnight. It's actually a protective effect because it can be very dangerous if our blood sugar stays too low for too long. So the body goes into kind of a stress response and releases cortisol or stress hormone in order to release glucose that's been stored in our tissues, and it releases that into the bloodstream. This is actually one common reason that people wake up in the middle of the night. Maybe you wake up feeling hungry, like you need a snack, or just feeling like, I don't know why I woke up, but I'm waking up around 2 or 3 a.m. pretty consistently. It can be from this reactive hyperglycemic effect. Ideally, we want to see kind of this green fluctuation. Uh, Less high peaks, less deep valleys. We still have to have some level of fluctuation just naturally, but we want to keep it within a more ideal range. So, optimizing insulin sensitivity, first and foremost, one of the best tips that we can do is just to have consistent meal timing. I know this is a lot harder around the holidays, so maybe this just means that you're ensuring that you're having a consistently balanced breakfast to start your day. But within consistent meal timing, ideally, we're not skipping meals. It can be so tempting when we're going to have a large Thanksgiving dinner to say, nope, I'm not going to have the breakfast. I'm going to save up my calories, quote unquote, right? But really encourage you to not go in with the mentality of saving up your calories. It's just setting yourself up to overeat. Also, minimizing grazing. So, giving your digestive system at least 4 or 5 hours between meals to allow your digestive system to rest will activate something called the migrating motor complex. This is essentially like giving your digestive system a shower. It's able to rest, it's able to reset, and then it's able to more effectively digest your next meal. Our digestive system, also like many other body systems, relies on circadian rhythms, which are these 24-hour body clocks, which means that our body learns our patterns and will begin producing digestive hormones, digestive enzymes in anticipation of our meals. But that can only happen if we have that consistency so that our body can get on that rhythm. That, in and of itself, can help improve digestion and insulin sensitivity. And then movement, of course, is another great way to utilize glucose more effectively, help ease the responsibility of insulin production on the pancreas, because our muscles is the site of 70% of our glucose disposal. So whether it's resistance training or walking, both are very effective, especially when done either in anticipation of your meal or after your meal. But that's a great way to incorporate that's a great tool to incorporate to help improve insulin sensitivity. Peak time to go on a 15-minute walk would be about an hour after your meal when glucose really is hitting your bloodstream. It's typically that glucose peak. Alternatively, if you have the ability to do a resistance training workout before your holiday celebrations, that will maximize your insulin sensitivity. So that effectiveness of your insulin to move that glucose doesn't only have to be after your meal. This can have a similar effect if you're kind of priming your system beforehand. So I want to touch briefly on how to structure our plate, how to build a balanced plate during the holidays. This is going to look a little bit different. But ideally, I'm going to show y'all over here. Ideally, we want to start with our fiber, with our vegetable portion, right? So we just made this lovely salad. Ideally, when it comes to those fiber-rich, non-starchy vegetables, we want to fill about half of our plate. That, again, is going to give us some great prebiotic fibers, potentially some probiotics, depending on what else you add to it. But that's how we're going to structure our plate. That's how we're going to really start off our meal. Maybe this is green beans. Maybe this is Brussels sprouts. Maybe this is carrots are a little bit on the starchier side, but still a great way to start off your plate. Having that half a plate be your vegetable, non-starchy vegetable. And then here I have just a cup of some shredded chicken. A cup of chicken or poultry or some other kind of animal-based protein is going to be about 5 ounces. This, I had it a little bit more of a heaping cup, so maybe closer to 6 ounces. 6 ounces of an animal-based protein is going to give you close to around 30 grams of protein, which is a decent amount for most people. Of course, everyone's needs are going to be a little bit different. But that's how we want to kind of structure our plate. If you can get 4 to 6 ounces of protein, maybe that's turkey, maybe that's ham, maybe that's steak. My family really doesn't like turkey, so we're making beef stew. So that's going to look a little bit different for everyone, but ideally about a quarter of your plate with a half a plate of vegetables. And then when it comes to our starches, I just have here some delicata squash. Winter squash is a really great fiber-rich carbohydrate option. So delicata squash, as you can see, I didn't take the skin off of it. I don't actually know if you can see. We'll do this. as long as you wash it properly, you can eat the skin, and I find it delicious. It gets nice and tender, but this could be sweet potatoes, this could be yams, this could be mashed potatoes, all the different potato renditions that I feel like people have over Thanksgiving. This could also be rice or quinoa or some other grain. Maybe it's corn. Uh, Maybe it's cornbread. Maybe it is bread. For this meal, because it is a little bit, and I just disappeared. That might not work. Because it's a little more higher fiber of these starch sources, I would probably add a piece of bread to this to make it a little bit more balanced. But, that is what a balanced holiday plate could look like. Maybe you have multiple protein sources. We can still utilize that quarter of a plate visual and divide that up. Maybe you have multiple carbohydrate sources. Same thing, divide that up. With a lot of holiday meals, you're going to notice I haven't mentioned fat. And fat is going to be inherent in a lot of the foods that we're going to be eating. So you saw that I added the pumpkin seeds and the dressing to the salad. The chicken is a dark meat chicken. So inherently, I'm going to have some fat in there as well. But maybe you're doing like a less lean cut or a dark meat of the turkey. You're going to get your fat source inherent within there. So it's not necessary that we always need to add the fat source. Alrighty, so let's use a little bit more time to chat through the nutrition, mood, alcohol connection. We'll keep it brief, and I'm just going to share some mocktail recipes with you all. But I really encourage you, regardless of what you're deciding, to just make a game plan. So if you do or do not want to consume alcohol, address the why behind that. Are you someone who likes to enjoy alcohol around the holidays because your family is super into wine and it's an opportunity for you to try new things, learn more? It's kind of my situation, where, I can learn a little bit more, enjoy, and kind of have that aspect of the holiday be a little bit different than every day. But maybe you're someone who it helps take the edge off. And can we strategize some other practices that maybe you can implement before going to your family meal if alcohol is more so used as a coping strategy for stress management, anxiety, things of that sort? We don't need to touch too much on that today, but just kind of my encouragement to you to assess like the why behind that choice, and to also set realistic expectations for yourself. But going in with a plan is always going to be helpful. So setting yourself up for success can involve a handful of different strategies, but first and foremost, hydrate well. Hydrate well beforehand, drink enough water, consider having some sugar-free electrolytes. Excess water and electrolytes are going to be excreted in response to alcohol intake. So it's really important that you're not just trying to hydrate after, but that you're really going into the evening or the event well hydrated. Maybe when you arrive, can your first drink not be alcohol? Can it be a sparkling water or, some other fun beverage that people are having that doesn't include alcohol? Just as you're making your round, saying your hellos, and then once you start having some bites to eat, then you can have the glass of wine or whatever it might be, a cocktail, something like that. Now, supplement considerations. B vitamins and zinc are all depleted with alcohol intake, but also these vitamins and minerals can help inhibit the absorption alcohol inhibits the absorption and usage of these vitamins and minerals, specifically B1, B12, folate, and zinc. Just note that B vitamins are also involved in energy production, so avoid taking them with dinner time. For some people, they can impair their sleep, so better to take it with breakfast or lunch. Another supplement that we chat about occasionally within this context of this conversation is N-acetylcysteine. It's also called NAC or NAC. An animal study actually showed that when these animals were pre-treated with NAC prior to ethanol ingestion, so prior to alcohol consumption, they had a decreased oxidative stress load on their liver. And so NAC, long story short, is shown to have a protective effect for the liver. Now, this is not the same if you take NAC after. It's only effective if you take it before. It can actually have a harmful effect if you take it after. So taking something like 600 milligrams of N-acetylcysteine on an empty stomach before your meal, before going into this event where you're going to have alcohol, can be very helpful. If you do decide to drink old world wines from Spain, Italy, other parts of Europe, parts of the Mediterranean tend to be better, lower alcohol, slightly fewer additives, more often biodynamic, compared to some like newer world wines, Australia, New Zealand, US, things of that sort. And clear spirits being better than more of these darker spirits that have more contaminants in them because they've been sitting, aging in these barrels. So that's just a note if you are going to have alcohol consumption. But I wanted to share with you all as we wrap up today some healthy holiday mocktails. And the star ingredient really being apple cider vinegar. So these both of these beverages are great to start your evening to support digestion, to support blood sugar balance. Even if you're going to have alcohol afterwards, doesn't matter. But apple cider vinegar is our star here because it contains acetic acid. And acetic acid is or has been shown to actually lower glucose and insulin response after a meal. So it makes it a really, really good tool for helping essentially prime your digestive system and improve blood sugar balance. So the first one that we have here, and I'm happy to share this recipe and have it sent out with our recording here, but I'm not going to use a mixer or a soda or anything like that, but I'm using Spindrift. I don't know how I can do this so it looks not upside down. But this is the blood orange tangerine Spindrift. We're really doing more of a blood orange type of mocktail with this one. But we're going to first and foremost start with some apple cider vinegar. You really want to get it with the mother that's going to have more of these probiotics in it. So we're just going to start with 1 ounce, which is equivalent to 2 tablespoons. And my sparkling water is already cold. This is just blood orange juice. I had prepared it earlier. And we're just going to use, this is the juice of half of a blood orange. So this is the most juice I will go for. That was about 3 ounces. And then if you like it a little tangier, which I do, I'm just going to use juice from about 1/4 of a lemon. We'll do the whole thing. Alrighty. And then we are ready to add our sparkling water. I like Spindrift because it's flavored with juices. And so it has a little bit of more of a natural sweetness and the natural essence to it. You can see this is a lovely little color here. It's a little tangy. It's a little sweeter because you're going to add the juice, but the next one that we're going to make is not sweet. And then I would actually just garnish with a little orange here. It can be summertime. It can really be any time of year. But that's our first one that we have. It's our citrus mocktail. And the second one we have is going to be more of an apple spin-off. So holiday season, you're going to get more options for flavored sparkling waters. Are they my first choice? No, but I think lesser of two evils, right? And some of these can make your mocktails really fun. So I found this spiced apple sparkling water. And with any of these, we're still going to start out with the 1 ounce or 2 tablespoons of the apple cider vinegar. And again, this is a sparkling water still, so it's not like a soda. It's not sweetened or anything. It just has the essence of those flavors. Next, I have some Ceylon cinnamon, also really helpful spice for helping regulate blood sugar balance. So I like quite a bit of cinnamon. I'm just going to do essentially 2.5 dashes or so, but you can do that to taste. And then I will mix that up a little bit with a straw. This one's more simple, but effective. So then all we have is the apple cider vinegar, a dash of cinnamon, and our sparkling water. This sparkling water is funny because you get the smell of the apple, you get some of the apple flavor, but none of the actual sweetness of the apple. Alternatively, if you really wanted to, as I make a mess on my cutting board with this sparkling water. You could always add, I would say, a dash of an apple cider if you really did want that sweetness, if you felt that the apple cider vinegar is too tangy of a taste for you. And then I'm actually just going to garnish this with some pomegranate seeds. And then you have a fun little apple mocktail. And that one I prefer. I don't like as sweet, but I had that yesterday and I was craving it today. So it grows on you with these apple cider vinegars. But again, you're doing about 2 tablespoons diluted in at least 4 ounces of water. You can always sip it through a straw if you're concerned about, tooth enamel damage. But if you're sipping it through a straw and diluting it appropriately, shouldn't have too many issues. But of course, some people have more sensitive teeth. So those are my 2 recipes for you. I'll have those included in the email that goes out with this recording. These are some of my references, so you can always review these slides later if you're interested in any of the studies that I did mention. But thank you so much for joining. The recording will be available in the next couple of days for anyone who might be interested in rewatching or sending over to another PPMA patient. If you'd like to schedule a one-on-one nutrition appointment with me, please feel free to give the office a call. I am taking new individuals. Happy to meet with you to discuss more related to holiday eating and things of that sort. But otherwise, would love to take any questions at this time if anyone has any questions. Let's see. Oh, John, I see your question about halva. I'm not aware that it's related to tempeh, but
Ooh.
I might not be informed.
I'll look it up, but maybe it is, and I've got an excuse to enjoy that.
Yeah.
I did your comment on the bacteria outnumbering the other cells that make up my body. Other than I could feel my bacteria rumbling around and getting excited when I heard you. Um, every now and then, sometimes if I go to the dentist or like I had a medical procedure and then a follow-up urine test that says I'll probably be taking some kind of an antibiotic. And, since we probably take more antibiotics during the sniffle season when we get diagnosed with something that is bacterial, is the old recommendation of, yeah, just have some yogurt or kefir after the course of antibiotics enough? Or if I'm orchestrating the massacre of 40 trillion, little bitty bacteria dudes, does something more serious appropriate, or is that like book a consultation kind of a question?
Yeah. Well, it certainly can depend on a couple different factors. First and foremost, what was the state of your gut before you had implemented those antibiotics? Was it, 2 antibiotic cycles, one after the other? Even from the standpoint of what has your microbiome looked like as you were developing and growing into an adult, those first, I would say, 10 years or so, there's a more specific number that I don't know off the top of my head, but really ground the foundation for our gut microbiome is set very early on in life. And that's not to say that we can't make changes to it. But I think anywhere where you can get that probiotic, whether it's probiotic supplementation, probiotics through the diet, is only going to be helpful. And it's even, probiotic supplementation doesn't always effectively inoculate your gut. We just had a blog article release on this that mentions this to a certain extent, but we can't just throw any probiotic at a situation. There are certain probiotics that are more likely to actually effectively kind of establish themselves within your gut. There are different probiotics that are more likely going to survive the journey through your very acidic stomach environment and actually reach your large intestine. So there's a lot more nuance to the probiotic conversation, but I would say having the kefir, having the probiotic yogurt, things of that sort, there's absolutely no harm in that. And for a lot of people, that can be enough, right? If they are going into their antibiotics with a very robust microbiome and environment.
So actually, even before wouldn't be too soon to start.
No, not at all. Never too soon, never too late. I would say if you do have significant gut dysbiosis, so like bad bacteria outnumbering the good bacteria, you might be someone who actually notices that you can't tolerate probiotic foods because of that dysbiosis and because of the way that you might be feeding kind of preferential species according to differently from others. So, and that's something that we can do is do microbiome testing within our nutrition work together. So we can always take a peek at what's actually going on and be a little bit more specific with that if needed with the supplement
Um,
recommendations.
you do telehealth or only directly face to face in the office?
I'm actually only telehealth.
Oh, only telehealth. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
That works for me. Okay.
Wonderful.
Well, maybe then I'll see, what happens. But before they got the definitive readout on the identification of the 100,000 CFMs per milliliter, I looked at that and looked that up online and was like, whoa.
Yeah.
um, and that's what those symptoms. I just had a medical procedure that men get when they're senior and their prostate gets large, and the
Hmm.
urologist
Hmm.
says we got to do something about it, or you're not going to be able to pee anymore. So once the lab reports what they found about the urine culture, maybe I'll reach out for one of those sessions and I'll emphasize my yogurt habit.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And all those prebiotic foods too. So that
Yeah,
we're feeding those healthy bacteria.
got it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Awesome, John. Well, thanks for
Thanks,
joining.
Romana.
Hoping
Happy
to chat with you
Thanksgiving.
soon. Happy
Okay.
Thanksgiving to you too. Take care.
Bye-bye. Well done. Bye bye.